Not too much work on.
You know a bit about that, Daddy Clark?
Thanks, comrades, for inviting me to come along at the 150th anniversary. It's a wonderful honour for me personally to come along here and say a few words, because the Maritime Union is one of the great unions, one of the greatest unions in this country. Not only is it, the main reason is that basically it's a communist union. It's been involved in the class struggle for the last 100 years, and that's what's lacking in the country today. And I'd like to acknowledge we're on the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and I'd like to pay my respect to their elders past, present and emerging. Always was, always will be Aboriginal land. Thanks, comrades.
Hear, hear. Well, welcome, comrades, and you're in for a treat, and it's my greatest pleasure to be able to open up the 150th anniversary Veterans Guided Tour. And what we have with us, and the comment was made, it was quite a number of years on the waterfront. I think we added it up, and the veterans behind us reflect around 500 to 600 years. So they're going all right, and there's a lot of history here embodied in the actions, the struggles that these comrades have undertaken over many, many years. 150 years our union's been fighting bosses, been fighting for the rights of working class people to live in dignity, to live with respect, and to have decent jobs and a better community. We're not going to stop for the next 150 years doing the same thing until we get a better society and we get the rights that working class people deserve. But tonight we've got a wonderful exhibition, and there's been memorabilia from 150 years of our union's wonderful history of class struggle. And we have 8 of our most wonderful veterans behind me here who are going to walk through and talk to the various bits of memorabilia and various bits of banners, film unit material we've got, and a whole range of iconography and badges and so on and so forth collected over a long period of time. It's a wonderful collection. I hope you enjoy it, and I hope and I'm sure that you will absolutely enjoy the narrative from these wonderful comrades who we owe everything. Workers on the waterfront, workers at sea, workers in port authorities owe these comrades everything, because everything we've got now they won through struggle. And the beauty of tonight is that we're going to see them and we're going to hear them tell us about those struggles. And hopefully we can take them back to our workplaces, we can learn from that. But we're filming the thing as well so other workers can benefit from the immense working class knowledge and history embodied in so many beautiful comrades that we have here tonight. It's a magical occasion for us. It's a wonderful event. We welcome you all very, very much, and we hope you get as much out of it and enjoy it as much as I'm sure all the presenters here will. And they've been in here for a period of time going through and checking out the different bits of memorabilia and talking about I've heard some of the stories, and they're absolutely wonderful and beautiful, and they make up the fabric, the wonderful, beautiful fabric of working class history that our union embodies. So I'll leave it at that, comrades, but thank you all for coming. It's greatly appreciated. You're all so welcome, and you are about to witness a wonderful and historic event. And on that note, I'll hand it over to the Sydney Branch Secretary, Paul Keating. So tonight is a jointly host function between the National Office and the Sydney Branch. So I'll hand it over to Keto, but thanks very much, comrades, and onward and forward for another 150 years of struggle.
Well, comrades, it's a great honour to, along with the National Office and Warren Smith, to open up this exhibition formally and have this wonderful event being organised by legends of our union, stalwarts of our union that have fought to deliver and provide what we have as workers, in today's day. I want to firstly acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that we meet here today and pay my respects to their elders past and present. It is very important that we open up our meetings always with the injustices that have been perpetrated through the oppression of colonialism. Our greatest struggles for justice must first always be delivered by those that are most oppressed. And our First Nations peoples are the most oppressed of the working class, and we must fight to change that. Comrades, on behalf of the Sydney Branch Executive, and we've got here today Paul, Nathan and Brad. It's a great honour for us. It's a culmination of 150 years of workers that you will see with all the documentation, memorabilia throughout the ages. A history that we need to understand so that we know how to go forward. And I want to pay my respects to two wonderful comrades that brought this about. Bill Peary and Neil Towie. Two wonderful comrades who work out at Trades Hall. They are, in my view, working class treasures. And when you meet them, you feel like you're going through a history lesson on trade union, labour, history, when you have a sit down and a coffee with them. But it's their dedication and commitment to working class people. And what you will see through this exhibition is a reflection of the hard work and commitment that they have and love of their class, the working class, that has delivered this. They do this not for money, but because of the conviction and the love of the working class and the trade union movement that has delivered them the dignity of work themselves. I want to pay respects to this wonderful delegation, like I said, stalwarts of our union. We're going to go through today's exhibition, giving you the history of working class politics, working class struggles that have delivered for maritime workers, and more broadly, the working class, through the connections of those struggles, not just locally, but internationally. And it'll be throughout this whole exhibition that we will see that, and it will be these wonderful comrades of ours, like I said, legends of our union, that will narrate that and give the historical account. The veterans are a very important part of the working class and trade unions. Our vets have continued to organise, continue to be at the forefront of every struggle, on every picket line, at every gate where the fight is, whether it's industrial, whether it's political, whether it's social. That's why they're legends. They lead by their examples and by action, and we are always inspired. So comrades, please put your hands together for our legends, veterans.
Well, the first, what I'd like to do in the first instance is introduce Jimmy Donovan. Jimmy probably needs a little introduction to many comrades here. He's an ex-president of the MUA. He was a long-term branch secretary of the Sydney branch of the union. He's been a working class activist all his life and a leader. And Jimmy will take over the reins now on behalf of the veterans. He's the National Secretary of the MUA Veterans, and he'll introduce the other comrades and we'll start this wonderful display. Thanks, comrades.
Let me start by saying that nothing is being spared this year on this wonderful 150th anniversary of our union. Nothing. And Warren has been given the responsibility on behalf of the national body, and of course, here we go, Paul, on behalf of the Sydney branch, which is, in my considered opinion, one of the most important branches of the union for a lot of reasons. So I'll leave it at that. But it's great that the history of this union is being told in many, many ways. And I don't think of any union in Australia, and I've been around the world a bit, that has this rich history. And we're going to tell you about this rich history, and when you listen to it, you'll understand why it's rich, because of the people and the workers that were involved in this magnificent industry, the seamen and the wharfies and all those other associated. Okay, so what I'm going to do is introduce I'm going to introduce Billy Kittens first, one of our veterans. Go over there. Georgie Rowbottom, Bobby Lee, Glenn Wood, Johnny Graham, and I thought we were the older comrades here tonight. Well, we are, but there's a chap who's brought me some memorabilia of his uncle, the grandfather, who was an official of the Sydney branch in the 1930s. His name was Wally Coghlan. He wasn't a bad bloke to start with because he was a member of the Communist Party, but then he left and there was a little bit of what you would call hargy-bargy in the 1940s. But he's here, Wayne, and he's got this beautiful book, Paul, he's got this wonderful book about what happened in 1967 when they recognised Wally as an official of the union all them years. So that's good, and I'm going to have more talks with him. Now what I'm going to do is where we start now, we'll start here and we'll walk through and I'll introduce who we're going to speak. Joey Deacon.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks, comrades. Great roll up here. Good to see some good people around the joint. We lose a few each year, and but we gain strength by those that are still around. When you have a look at this mural, you look at the leadership, you look at the EBs, you look at the big Jim Healy's, the Pat Garrity's, the Johnny Coombs, the Paddy Crumlins. All those comrades can't do attack without the support of their union, without the support of the rank and file. Each and every one of these comrades over many, many years relied on the strength and the ability of working men and women within the union, the Seamen's Union, the Firemen and Deckhands, the Waterside Workers Federation, you know, all these wonderful unions that went, eventually formed the one, cannot do a thing without the solid base of unionism from each and every one of you. And right to this day, you know yourself, when you get onto a job, the first thing you know as a delegate is do not isolate yourself. Talk to your comrades on the job. Get the feeling of the job. If you've got a hostile employer, get the feeling of what's happening. Don't go it alone. These comrades here, the ones that I just mentioned, they went around the world and they spoke to great men like Nelson Mandela. They spoke to great men like Harry Bridges. And they formed that international connection where we become a union of internationalists. That's where it comes from. The ability to organise on the job, the ability to stick together. You know, Morrison, knucklehead, he's a drop in the ocean of some of the characters who have had in this country. 150 years down the track, what Warren said, in a couple of years' time, let's hope in May, Morrison will be gone. Reef, gone. John Howard, gone. Peter Costello, gone. We're not gone. We're not gone. We're celebrating 150 years. How good is that?
Here to stay.
You have a look at this with the Boonaroo. You see the photos of the Boonaroo. When you have a good look, with those that haven't, there's a comrade over here and he'll talk about it. John Graham was on this ship. He was on this ship when the wharfies there. Now the wharfies didn't say to governments on that vessel, you know, she was trading to Vietnam. They didn't say to government, we're refusing to work your ship. What they said to government is, we are not taking arms to Vietnam to kill women and kids. That's what they said. They said, we'll take up the cans of beers for the soldiers, we'll take up the food for them and necessities for them, but don't expect us to take arms to kill people. We are a peace-loving union, and peace has always been and always will be union business. I'm going to pass on to someone else because there's plenty to say and plenty of others to say. Johnny, up you come, comrade.
The Boonaroo.
Thank you, comrades. I'd just like to say that what Kevin Torrey said, you know, you might have shocked a lot of people at Communist Union. Well, he's right. We had communist leaders. The membership weren't communists. There's no that. They mostly voted Labour, but it was they had allegiance because they knew that those men got us the best conditions in the world, and we become, Harry Bridges, you might say, might have led his union, but we were the greatest union in the world. And I'm a member of the Communist Party, and I just want to go on record as saying that. Thank you, Kevin, for that. Now, look, yes, the Boonaroo. You're right, and I'm glad you brought that up. There's a lot of little things about the Boonaroo that today is the history has been on our union website. It talks about the Boonaroo refused to sail to Vietnam. Well, that's my discharge from the Boonaroo, and I can tell you we sailed to Vietnam. But as Joe said, we sailed to Vietnam as a peace ship. Can I tell you a little bit about the history so you know about this? During the Korean War, the Union was wedged. It was the Cold War period. And the question about whether we were going to support our boys up in Korea come up, and it divided the Union. And we knew, our leaders told us, the filthy things that Sigmund Rhee from South Korea did, the war, what the truth of the war was. And half the Union said, I don't want to go up there and be part of that. Same thing as in the Vietnam War. And during the Vietnam War, all those years later, at the time we sailed the Boonaroo, the whole world was for the war in Vietnam. Because it was going to stop the commies from coming down here to Australia. 75% of Australians were for the war in May of 1966. So this was when the government wanted to wedge us. And they thought, they didn't need bloody the Boonaroo or the Japara to go to Vietnam. But this was something to embarrass us and to split us. The ACTU at the time was dead set against any protest against the Vietnam War, to our shame. They come around, but we brought them around. And they said that we're going, and they conscripted the Boonaroo. Our first reaction was to say, well, stuff you, we're not going to go to Vietnam, we're not going to go up there. But then leaders like E.V. Elliott said, no, I'm going to put it to you, stop work meetings all around Australia, a free vote like we always have. And he hoped it coming out of there, and it did come out from the floor, that we would sail the Boonaroo as a peace ship. And after the Boonaroo went there to Vietnam, and the headlines were all over the world, we were the first union in the world to say no to the Vietnam War, what was going on in Vietnam. First. Your union was the first. And I'm so proud of that we did. And we came back, and within a few months, that 75% went around the other way. All it needed was a little bit of leadership from the working class, and then we turned around and saw what it was, and what the war was all about. So I'm proud of that. There's a couple of little things. Well, by the way, it's 150 years to this day, and I remember it well. So, yeah. Can I say this too? This is the picture up here, and I've got a little bit of a gripe. You'll see that that's the crew of the Boonaroo lined up there. It goes on a little bit there. It was a mural, a big mural, and they dismantled it, and I got chopped out. So tonight I'm appealing, can you do something about it? Yes, comrades, look, and there's lots of other things around here, and we'll tell the truth. Seamen always tell the truth. We never stretch a story. Now, they're off the coast down here. Just outside this heads, seamen lost their lives. The motto was, when a seaman goes to work, a seaman goes to war. And all around this coast, there was Australian ships, 1 in 8. We suffered the most casualties of any of the services, the defence services. The merchant seamen and Australian merchant seamen all the way along this coast. The war didn't come to Australia. It came to Sydney Harbour. It came to Darwin. Wharfies died on the wharves in Darwin. My dad was in Darwin. I got wounded that day. So I know a little bit about that. And, you know, there's all the seamen. And I'd like you can, when you, to look up there about the seamen that were lost in the Merchant Navy. I'm so proud to be the Merchant Navy. Can I... Little thing I'm filthy of. When you saw all those anti-vaxxers down there with our red bloody ensign, the red duster, I'm filthying them using our proud Merchant Navy bloody flag to have such a fascist organisation as that. Yeah. So just remember that next time you see it. That's not their flag, that's our flag, and I'm dirty on it. So yeah, comrades, anyway, I'm glad that someone else is coming over here now to tell a story. There's a million stories there. Nelson Mandela, imagine that. Nelson Mandela, right alongside our leader. And what a great pride that was. And it was one of our members, can I say the story? One of our members probably stopped apartheid. That's a big statement, isn't it? Wally Pritchard came to Pat Garrity and said, we should be boycotting oil. They can't run their bloody their armies and navies to suppress the people of South Africa. How many million was there? 45 million against 6 million. And he says they can't suppress them if their tanks and guns and armoured cars are not working. And they organised a boycott all over the world. Well, the British, the Danish, the Australian.
The Danes in particular. And I just supplement what John's saying. When Nelson Mandela was freed from his incarceration, when he got up and spoke, one of the first people he contacted was Pat Garrity and said, thank you. He said, because the oil embargoes that the Seamen's Union of Australia at the time and the Danish Seamen's Union under Hendrik Mular's leadership were that effective that not only did they cripple the ability of the fascist system of apartheid in South Africa to suppress people, what they done, all the weapons that they were using to shoot down Congolese people in the Congo, they had no gun, they had no petrol for their tanks, they had no petrol for their armoured personnel carriers. So all the efforts up to, to suppress Patrice Lumumba and all these freedom fighters in the Congo, it was suppressed because of this union's ability to say we need a worldwide a system, what do you call it, embargo, to make sure that this racist, rotten system is crippled. And that's what happened. And this union can take massive credit for it. And you can for supporting those people that are told you.
I've said my piece now, and let's hope one of my other comrades will come in.
And as Joe has said, E.V. Elliott and Jim Healy, that's where it started. It started on the wharf in 1937 when Jim was elected the General Secretary, and in 1942 Elliott was elected the Secretary of the Seamen's Union. And all of this montage, is all because of those two people, how they started it, and how later on it became. I mean, let's put it another way. Jim Healy died in 1961, and he was Charlie Fitzgibbons, who was a very competent person, became the National Secretary. But what happened was the politics of the waterfront didn't change because Healy died. It was embedded in the people that were on the waterfront to continue the legacy of that person. And the same with E.V. Elliott. I mean, he was served much longer than what Jim did, but nevertheless handed it over to Pat Garrity. Taffy Sweetenson, wonderful, wonderful people, and that's why the union is where it is today. Now, on a lighter note, this is George Williams. I worked in a gang with him in 1962. And he is the face of the mural that we took off the wall down at the old Union Rooms in 1990-91. And he was the photo of that bloke carrying the bale of I think it's wheat. Anyway, having said that, the best part about that, his father was Bochy Williams, who you'll see out here a bit later. And oddly enough, he was on the first kangaroo tour in 1908 to go over to England and play the first Test series. And he played for the wonderful Roosters. Okay, come down. I thought I'd throw that one in. Moving down.
So comrades, if we can move, if everyone can just move back now as we go, and we'll go through the other.
Moving down.
Wait, let you in.
Yeah. Okay. Moving down. Moving down.
Jamie. On that. Cool.
Paul Garrett on the fireman and deckhand.
So as we walk down in the 150th year, I've been asked to be an honorary junior veteran, I suppose, for the night, and represent a lot of firemen and deckhands workers who have since passed. It's 30 odd years now since the Firemen and Deckhands Union amalgamated into the Seamen's Union of Australia, precursor to the Maritime Union of Australia. And just been asked to say a couple of words about this banner here, Firemen and Deckhands. But an interesting banner that it is. It doesn't say Firemen and Deckhands Union. And it wasn't originally a union. On Sydney Harbour, you had the Firemen and Deckhands Association, men who stoked the fires of those coal tugs and coal ferries that operated on Sydney Harbour, and the deckhands. There was also the Tugboat and Ferrymen's Union. A man of little stature but massive heart, Don Henderson, come ashore in 1947 and worked at Nicholson Brothers, and they ran small ferries and lines launches around the harbour. Later amalgamated into Stannards and become that entity. But Don Henderson come in and after serving at war recognised that workers needed to serve with dignity and have the opportunity of a dignified wage, and put his hand up like so many have had. Firstly, to be the president of the Firemen and Deckhands Association and eventually the General Secretary. In 1968 it amalgamated with a group called the Coxswain and Drivers Association, those that drove the small launches on Sydney Harbour. 1969 and through to somewhere through to 1983. Don was one of the legendary leaders of that union. Between 1969 and 1978, just a small bit of history. He stopped some 561 ships with the help of the members there on the tugs and lines. They stopped those ships because of issues like wages and conditions, where workers didn't have the dignity that they deserved, didn't have the bedwear, the linen, just simple things in life. 561 ships were stopped. And you heard about Nelson Mandela. The Firemen and Deckhands Union at that time participated with the Seamen's Union in the stoppages of the SAF marine ships and participated in those embargoes. And on my wall in my mother's house sits Nelson Mandela's signature when he took the opportunity to shake my father's hand, who took over from Don Henderson in 1983 through to 1992 as the General Secretary. One of the small bits of the Firemen and Deckhands Union that wasn't known, that it was one of the first unions in New South Wales that saw equal pay for women, and that was at Sydney Ferries, a great bastion for the Sydney branch, where there's some 400 members today, where women didn't get equal pay. The union fought in 1971 and achieved that, and that's a massive goal. And today that legacy's moved on. And today that legacy's moved on, where women once worked in ticket boxes. The union said that's not good enough, let's get them out on deck. And now that moves into let's get them as engineers, and now we've got our own MUA masters driving ferries on Sydney Harbour. A small union but big in heart, and absolutely a part of the Maritime Union of Australia, proud to join with the Seamen's Union. A time when legendary union leaders used to come together, and Jimmy, my father, Don, many people come together with the Sydney Water Transport Group, where trade unions got together every month, dealt with the business that needed to be done and stood together to support maritime workers. Firemen and Deckhands Union of New South Wales.
Moving along, we're coming to these
No.
Photos behind? Oh,
No, Jimmy.
yeah, right. Okay, we're going to go to
Woodrow.
Glenn, Taz Ball.
Well, comrades, it's my pleasure to be able to talk about this gentleman here, Taz Bull, one of the National Secretaries, General Secretaries of the MUA and the WWF. A great man, in my opinion, took the Union a long way. It was a loss when we lost Taz. One of the things that Taz done is over here in the Cuban flag, was when the national conference is on, we have a silent auction up there, and half of the money now goes to the Cuban Kids Hospital and the other half goes to the Venezuelan Children's Hospital. That came about after a meeting with Paul Keating and Paul McAleer. We decided that we'd halve the money that we collected and look after the kids up in Cuba. All done through this bloke here, Taz Bull.
Well said, mate. Johnny Graham.
Comrades, if there's, sorry, you'll see all around the paint these black and white pictures all the way around, and there's a numerous amount of all around the place. What Evie Elliott asked this great artist to try to capture the whole history of the Union. And it's sad that some of the things like the early sailing ships is not there. But he told the life of the progression. In graphic terms, you looked into it, like the coal-burning ships for the firemen, the dirt birds we see them on deck. They used to call us the scalybacks, but that's another story. And there they are firing into the hellhole of these big furnaces down below. And people, you couldn't imagine people working under those conditions, and then dragging the ash bags all the way up the deck. These men, they wouldn't have any fat on them at all. And he told us stories like that. I was fortunate enough to be the last coal-fired ship on the Australian coast. God sake, mate, another good job. Good job, on the Australian coast. He told the story of all those facets about the rope work and the great skills of seamen and the comradeship. So if you're wondering what they are and you wander around later on, if you want to draw my attention to, I'll try to decipher it for you. But a great artist, and he should be in the greatest art museums or art galleries in the world.
Thank you. Billy Kittens, it's time, Australian Labor Party.
Golf's got a couple of beers there for it.
They're empty. One's not empty.
Comrades, a bit of a digression away from the industrial base and the political activism within the union that we've been speaking about, but it couldn't come at a more opportune time actually, because whether we like it or not, there's going to be a federal election in the next 6 weeks, and I think, without even commenting, I think everyone understands how important it is. I'll tell you how important it is by just starting this by indicating that the Labor Party came to power in 1972. In 1969, they would have won office, Whitlam would have been the Prime Minister, except that 4 DLP candidates in Victoria gave all their preference to the Liberal Party. Shame. And those 4 seats resulted in the Liberal Party prevailing and the Labor Party being deprived of government. So that shows you just how things can change and how we could have had not 72 to 76, but we could have had 69 onwards. But this is the question about the It's Time proposal. It was a 2-faceted thing. It was a campaign slogan, but it also, for the first time, brought out a common theme that was used extensively in advertising. So that happened in 1972 at the election. Now, the interesting thing about it, I'll indicate to you that some of the people that made up the theme. It was the people that made up the jingle, the advertising. And these are the people, when you look back, you'll laugh, these are the people that led it, and they were considered at the time significant people of influence in the entertainment industry. It was the who's who of entertainment. Tony Barber, Barry Crocker, Chuck Faulkner, Jimmy Hannon, Brian Henderson, Cole Joy, Graham Kennedy, Dawn Lake, Bobby Lim, Little Paddy, Bert Newton, Terry Norris, Hazel Phillip, Judy Stone, Jack Thompson and Jackie Weaver. They're people who are now, look back historically, as being significant people in the entertainment industry and are influencers. And the fact that we were able to, when I say we, the movement was able to be able to utilise those, they had an incredible influence in swaying things. The campaign itself was launched by Gough Whitlam at Blacktown Workers Club. Back then, in '72, Blacktown was just a fledgling suburb, but the party took the view at the time that there were a number of suburbs emerging like that all through Australia, in the major capital cities, and they wanted to hone in on workers, sitting in the auditorium of a workers club, watching and supporting the party that they hoped would take office. The other thing that had to be thought of, and I'm pretty sure this will be done this time round, I hope, is that Whitlam absolutely demolished Bill McMahon. Billy McMahon was the then Prime Minister. Proper analysis was done of all the failed policies and the lack of policy. And I'll quickly just go in a second to the things that the Whitlam government did, things that we all take for granted now that did not happen at all prior to 1972. So he was able to do a complete job on McMahon, and it was. People were looking for something better. We'd had 23 consecutive years of Conservative government. Some of the things that when they were elected were brought in that we just take for granted now was Medibank. Medibank was the first universal healthcare system. It applied from 81 to 80, sorry, it applied from 72 to 81. In 81, the Liberals got back in, and people forget, Medibank went. Yeah. For 4.5 years, we didn't have any universal health system. We'd had it, we'd seen what it could do, we knew it was wonderful for everybody, and we lost it for 4.5 years. When Hawke got back in 84, Medicare came in place of Medibank, and we again had a universal health system. The first thing that Whitlam did on the first day that he took office, and I think some of the older people will remember, there was a 2-person cabinet for 7 days. Gough Whitlam and Lance Barnard, the Deputy Prime Minister. They didn't have any ministers. They sat down and passed legislation through the House. And the first thing he did was declare that Australia was withdrawing from Vietnam, that conscription was being abolished, and that all of those comrades who were actually in jail because they were conscientious objectors and hadn't gone to Vietnam were to be immediately released from jail and in some circumstances compensated. The other thing is that this government for a time had a very wide social justice approach. Education. People forget. You didn't have free education. TAFE wasn't free. University wasn't free. How many, there are people here in this room who would not have got a university education but for the Labor Party removing all fees associated with it. All you had to do was pay for your books and, believe it or not, join the student union. Which I have to say Tony Abbott did something about removing at a later stage. But, things like childcare. We take things for granted now. The big argument now is how much we spend on childcare. The reality is, prior to 72, there was no government assistance for childcare. You either could afford it or you couldn't afford it. Preschool, same thing. Whitlam came in, indicated that there'd be some subsidies for preschool education so that children could go to a preschool before going to kindergarten. Some of the other things that we had, it mightn't seem a lot, but it meant pretty much to us. He instituted trade union training, tutor, if people remember, we had the Clyde Cameron College at Albury-Wodonga, where trade unions could go without any expense to themselves to an institution where trade unionists obtained assistant training, were able to listen to a number of wonderful trade union leaders, and that was all paid for by the Commonwealth. Set up, run, organised. There used to be a name for it, but I won't indicate what the name used to be called, but the taxi drivers all around Albury-Wodonga used to say, you're going to Red Hill. When they got you at you got off the aeroplane and they said, where are you going? We said, Tudor, Red Hill. Yeah, I'll take you up there now. The other thing, legal aid. There was no legal aid. It was brought in by this government. So, you know, we can go on, and I don't intend to. The simple fact of the matter is, so many things.
Free university.
Free university, free TAFE. Look at what's happened to our TAFE system now. All of these things, comrades, I don't want to get on a soapbox about what we need to do in the next 6 weeks. But all of these things were brought in, not by a Liberal government, by a working class government. The reality of life is, and look at the way they've been run down. They're systematically run down into the ground. TAFE teachers are demoralised. You know, they want to do more. Universities are sick of having to go out grounding for international students to be able to some way fund it. And that goes to part of the taxation system. But there were so many things that started. 23 years of Conservative government was jettisoned, and we had a government that really looked at what could be done. Urban development, decentralisation. This government said to the state governments, you must decentralise some of your offices and your organisations out to remote areas so that country areas can thrive as well. So, comrades, I'll leave it at that. It was a great campaign. Wonderful advertising. The first time that a party had sort of concentrated so much on advertising like that. Let's just hope we can do it again in 6 or 8 weeks' time.
Come up and around into the main,
Round into the corner.
into the main room here.
I was going to get a beer, but
As you can see, we've dealt with Levy Elliott and Jim Healy, and we'll most probably go inside a little bit more. But these were painted. These are working class. These are working class art, and I'm 99% sure in the 1940s, early 50s, the realist artists group was set up here in Sydney as a working class group of artists that did a lot of work, and in fact they did help us with the mural, which we'll deal with later, in the Sydney branch, and they also were instrumental in making sure that the working class history of our country was going to go on. They will last for hundreds of years thanks to them wonderful artists at that period of time.
I just got to say something about this one of EV. There's one it's around somewhere, and it's a good one of, it's EVs like that. He's pointing like I'm pointing at Bobby right now. He's pointing like that. And what it was, the union in those days, there was a lockout in Auckland. The wharfies were locked out. And the Seamen's Union and the Waterside Workers Federation, but in this case, Della Elliott, who you'll know as EV's wife, a great comrade and very active within the union movement. Her and EV were sending money over to the comrades that were on a picket line. The federal coppers intervened. Federal coppers got hold of it. They confiscated the money and they locked EV up. And when they got him out of jail, he's like this at a journalist who's sticking a camera in his face, and the caption in the Seamen's Journal, the next Seamen's Journal, have you paid your dues yet? So these are as Jimmy's articulated, these are leaders of exceptional character. Two people that changed the face of humanity in this country for quite a while. I mean, when Jim died, when Big Jim died, my father openly wept. My father and my mum were in Brisbane. That was a massive trip for him to go to Brisbane. When Jim died, when the big fella died, Mum and Dad flew home, and you'll see in one of the photos on the wall in there, the funeral, and it was the biggest funeral in Sydney, and it wasn't too far beyond the EV. But where's EV was straight up and down, and he was sometimes abrupt. The big fella, Big Jim, as he was affectionately known, was the opposite. He was a mild-mannered type of bloke. But between the two of them, and in fact, in the World Trade Union bodies, you know, the WFTU, World Federation of Trade Unions, at one time, the Secretariat of the World Federation of Trade Unions was E.V. Elliott, Big Jim Healy, and Harry Bridges from the ILWU.
Yes.
That was the strength they had. But by Jesus, the ship owners know that.
Moving in.
Can everyone go into the main hall?
Looking after your camera.
Yeah, we'll come back to that. Yeah. Start speaking. Okay. This is again working class art, and Joe and I have dealt with Mandela. But you see, prison to president. Now this was done by Ralph Sawyer. Ralph Sawyer was part of the art studio in the Sydney branch in the top floor that started in the 1950s, and he came a few years later. But it was the start of working class art as we know it, that supported both the seamen and the wharfies during that period of time. If you look back outside, you'll see this montage of photos from the Seamen's Union that was done by working class art. Now Ralph Sawyer was a magnificent, everything was self-taught. He wasn't taught how to do it. He did everything from scratch to ensure that this working class art in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s continued, and of course we don't do it today. We haven't got the space and time and area to do it, but nevertheless, it's people like Ralph Sawyer that have to be, you know, commended for what they did in that period of time. It was wonderful, and that's part of it. That there, by the way, is from the day that Mandela got out. I think it was in 1989-90, so it is some 30 odd years old when Ralph did that, and it is still prevalent today as it was then, from prisoner to president. Moving on.
So Jamie, over here to this, if everyone sort of have to go back over that side, and Bobby Lee's going to come in about the European directive.
Yeah, Jim Tannick took a delegation over to Strasbourg, it was actually, and we made a banner up. We got all the banners made up and MUA and everything. We're going to lead the march. Anyway, as the march progressed, all the other Frenchmen and all that come around behind us and everything, and they took over the march. And anyway, we thought it was a peaceful assembly, we thought. Next minute, this car's getting tipped upside down. They're all putting gas masks on. I said, "What's going on here, Jim?" He said, "I don't know." He said, "But it doesn't look too healthy." So they had Shanghais, they had them things that strapped to your arm, and they had ball bearings, and they're firing them at the Parliament House. I think they've done $3,000 worth of damage to the Parliament House. Anyway, you laugh, Jimmy Tanny said, MUA this way, we're going this way. We didn't want to be part of that, but it was really a good demonstration. But as you can see here, some of the gas, they had gas masks. We never knew there was going to be, it was supposed to be just peaceful. But when you have a look at it up close, It's not real peaceful. It was peaceful for us, but for the parliamentarians. And the next day I got a mind, there was Zoe Reynolds, Willie Adams, myself and Jim Tannick. We got into Parliament. They let us get into Parliament. And they didn't want to give away to the wharfies. Of course, we had earmuffs on and they were talking in English, but they were talking in French. And they said, if we give away to the wharfies today, the big beef tomato farmers they'll want something tomorrow, and someone else will want something. So eventually it come to a happy ending, and the wharfies got what they wanted, and that was it. That was all it was about. So that was good. And Vale, Jimmy Tannick, mate, lovely fella, beautiful.
Joey? Now this here is the history of the MUA in the history of all of the amalgamations that took place prior to the seamen and the wharfies amalgamating in 1993. It was destined to happen. The Seamen's Union and the wharfies, always had that urge and inkling to amalgamate sooner or later. And I happened to be the national president of the union at that period of time, of the wharfies, and it was a great period to go through. Tassie Bull was retiring, and so was Pat Garrity. And so it's left to John Coombs and Tony Papaconstantinius to bring the two unions together. Now, if you've got a camera, take a photo of all of the amalgamations and all the people that joined the seamen and the wharfies before the amalgamation in 1993. It was a wonderful, wonderful period. As I said, we were destined to amalgamate, and we did. And I'm going to say it has been a wonderful amalgamation that has proven absolutely 101% correct. Because we had the right people behind John and Tony Pappas to get that amalgamation going, and it happened. And I'll tell you what, there's not 1 second in my life, even though I'm retired, that I look back and say it shouldn't have happened. It did happen, and I'm going to say it was a wonderful thing that happened in 1993. I want to introduce Georgie Rowbottom, who was part of the early amalgamation with the Seamen's Union from the stewards, and he's going to tell you how.
Good evening, thank you very much for letting me be here today. Back in 1987, well before that, was actually when Ken McLeod first became the National Secretary of the Federated Marine Stewards and Pantermen's Association. We had a vision then that there would be amalgamation somewhere down the track. We had people of the calibre of Bobby Ambrose, Mickey Hall, Jimmy Bourne. We had people in Melbourne, Dickie Ryan and Tommy McQuaid, Joey Gorman down there. And of course we had a national president who survived all the regimes that went through the Stewards Union in Taffy Pickavance. And so in 1987 it came to pass. I can remember the night quite well. The legendary John Benson and myself did the scrutineering of the business, and John and myself we had a wonderful night afterwards at the Spanish Club, which is very good. But being an ex-steward, stewards are very good at that. So I'll leave you with that part of it for my part in this, and I'm sure Joe D can be able to help out wherever we are now. Thanks for your time.
When the amalgamation come along with the Stewards Union, there was plenty of hostilities around the joint, and the hostilities were coming from the employers. They were coming from the employers. The employers could see what was happening. The stewards were talking to the seamen. The seamen were in turn talking to the cooks. And they could see their little world starting to get smaller and smaller. And they can see a united front between the maritime unions going to sea, there were 7 unions. There were 7 unions in the seagoing industry. And what the philosophy was of the likes of EV and Taffy and others, plenty of others. George himself. George didn't mention himself there. George was a warrior in that time. He was a warrior for the amalgamation. He's been a stickler for this union ever since. And I'll tell you what, he deserves a big clapping because he's been a great player over the years. George will go back and get it right up to his neck in that amalgamation. And as I said here, the ship owners didn't want it. They hated it. Because they could see that there was a unified effect, that we weren't bitching and crying. See, one time there, the stewards had a separate dispute, and the vessel was held up for something like 2 months or something, the bulkies.
Yeah, the bulkies, yeah.
And that done none of us any good. And there was times when the Seamen's Union held a vessel up, but stewards were sitting on the beach. So the unions, both unions said, this is no good. The only one that's benefited from this is the ship owners. So we need to change. And by Christ have we changed. 150 years later, look where we are, comrades.
Comrades, you come up here.
Both Thomas and
Kevin. Well, comrades, what a special moment this is, celebrating 150 years of history for our union with these wonderful elders of our union. And, there might be 1,000 years of experience with these comrades that have taken us around, but myself and Nathan and other First Nations, Uncle Kevin in this room, we're talking about over 60,000 years of continuous culture. And so, peace is union business, and so is First Nations rights. I started on the wharf when I was 17 years old and, learned pretty quickly the great value of unionism, but also the great value of trade unionism in this country to the rights of my people. As Keto said in the, at the beginning, the most oppressed people in this country, the genocide that we've suffered, the forced assimilation, the cruelties to our people, and like union members, like workers, we haven't stopped fighting for our rightful place in this country and the dignity that we deserve. The Uluru Statement from the Heart, I think, represents so much. It represents not only that 60,000 years of continuous culture, but it also represents our people coming together in many instances, putting together statements and petitions that have been ignored, coming together and fighting and learning the lessons all the way along, and then putting it into this brilliant document here that's behind me, the Uluru Statement from the Heart. It's such an important document. It's a live political campaign. We've got to fight hard to get rid of this government because they've been sitting on it for 5 years almost and have done nothing with it. They don't want to empower workers. They don't want to empower First Nations people. They want to dumb down the public. But we've got to get out there and fight in the coming months to make sure that a government that supports a referendum to enshrine a First Nations voice, as the Uluru Statement calls for, gets in, and then we go to a referendum campaign. And comrades, when we do that, all of this collective experience, all of our collective strength is going to go into seeing that we win that referendum and we change this country, and First Nations people are recognised as the sovereign people that we've always been.
On you, Thomas.
Just one more thing, comrades. There's some wonderful First Nations leaders in our union. Very proud of, have a look at little Vicky Remorter, a seafarer. She went to the national stage in Canberra, spoke after Noel Pearson, who's a very well-respected orator, and she showed him up. Little Vicky, she's
about that high, but she's bigger than this room in her heart and spirit. And so you can see her speech on YouTube. Look up Vicky Mortar and her wonderful advocacy for this. Uncle Kevin, do you want to?
Uncle Kevin, yes.
I'd just like to endorse what Thomas has said. I think having been involved in the struggle for 60 of me 80 years, I think it's not an easy struggle, because what we're dealing with is, it's a system that's geared against us. We saw the recent shooting up in the Northern Territory, Kumanjai Walker, and even on the ABC, which I still refer to as the Anglo-British Corporation. And they never said anything about an all-white jury. An all-white jury. And that's what we're up against. And previous week, they made a program down in Tasmania about back roads. Like, beautiful country town, not a black face to be seen. People have been there for 50 to 100,000 years. Nothing. So we've sort of been blocked out, but one of the great strengths of this country, and I think it's the last bastion of strength, is the solidarity with the left wing and the communist influence unions, because the right wing unions have never been, to be honest, have never been really helpful to us. It's only been the strong left wing unions have walked with us in our struggle, and they've done some things here that I could tell you that would make a stone weep. But Thomas is strongly pushing the Uluru Statement, and I think in my lifetime it's almost up there with Chief Seattle's statement about the environment. It's a beautiful statement, and I fully endorse it. Thank you, comrades.
Well, comrades, we're here on the Patrick's display, the 1998 Patrick's display. If you look over here, there's some books that have been set up by one of the wharfies' wives, who spent every day during the dispute putting the newspapers into a file where we can keep a record of what took place during the dispute. That photo there was one of the best photos we ever seen. It was when the Columbus Canada was turned around in Los Angeles and sent back to Sydney to be unloaded, when it was loaded by the scabs. And we had to come back to Sydney and it was unloaded by the Labor, the Corrigan sacked. This is another one of the photos of everybody standing outside the gates of, I think it was Darling Harbour, Jimmy, isn't it?
Webb Dock.
Oh, Webb Dock.
In Melbourne.
Yeah, Webb Dock in Melbourne, where everybody was trying to get back inside but couldn't get back inside because the scabs were in there and the rotten dogs and coppers kept them out.
Two-legged.
Yeah, two-legged. Here we have a history of the Patrick's dispute, but we're not going to talk about that, Bobby and myself. We're going to tell you about what happened on the picket line. So you've got a bit of an idea of what we were doing from night to night. I remember one thing especially, and he's an official of the union now, Brad Dunn, young Brad Dunn when he was there, trying to get over the fence to get to the scabs and give them a hiding. We had to pull him back because he was trying his hardest. He knew his father had been sacked and he was sticking up for his dad. Done a wonderful job, Brad. Done a wonderful job.
My first recollection, I live on the Central Coast. I get up at 4 a.m, drove to Sydney. I get to Hornsby around about 4:30 and then come across on the news that the wharfies have been locked out at Patrick's. And I didn't take much notice. I was just listening to the music, whatever. So when I get to Botany, they're all out in the grass. Everyone's out in the grass and they've all been locked out. Anyway, the picket line was there and it just went on from there. But some of the stories I could tell you on the picket, there was a family, I don't know if there's a photo of them somewhere, there's a woman and a daughter. They spent every day and every night on that picket line for the whole month, I think it was. Whatever, yeah, and anyway, they were at the 20-year reunion. But some of the things that happened on that the picket line, it was peaceful in some respect, but we used to egg the bus every time it come in, and I laughed. The bus driver pulled up one day and he pointed to me and he said, because I had a black and white jacket on. He went, the police come and grabbed me and took me away. They said, he keeps egging the bus, and the eggs all over the bus. So anyway, we went out to where they pull up at, and we egged them out there as well. So, well, a lot of blind faith was put in John Coombs, and he came through with it. I said, look, we would have lost everything. No sickies, no holidays, no nothing. I had about 30 years service, I think, at the time. Would have lost all that. Would have went out of there without a bumper. But we put our faith in John Coombs, and he delivered. He delivered. We got the first decision, I think it was. We won, and then they appealed it, and we were out again. So anyway, after the dispute had finished, John Coombs said 1,400 members have been sacked. 1,400 members have got to go back in. So we all went back in. I was in for one day. The next day I went to work, they wouldn't let me in. I said, what's up here? So I was locked out for an extra 2 months. I was classed as an undesirable. So anyway, I had to go to Kembla. So I was driving from Central Coast to Port Kembla. And I worked down there for 2 months. But a lot of credit's got to be given to some of the young people that just got onto the waterfront because they were working in Kembla while we were on the picket line. Every one of them donated $200 every week to that picket line. And there was a guy come over one day and he said, who's in charge here? I said, well, I'm a delegate. He said, can I give you this $500? I said, what do you mean? He said, this is for he said, I'm a capitalist. He said, but I don't believe what the government are doing to use people. He said, there'll be another $500 here next week. I said, well, hang on, we give you a bit of... He said, I don't know recognition, mate. He said, I just want to give you this $500 for the picket line. But I never ate a sausage sandwich for 6 months after it. You get sick of sausage sandwiches. So do you want to go over that?
James, another story, and it's a true story of what happened on the picket line. We were trying to find out where these scabs were being picked up and taken into the terminal. We were looking everywhere for them. And we finally found out that they were parking their cars in Ramsgate and being ferried around on a boat to Patrick's. So some of our comrades went out to Ramsgate one day, and where all their cars were, they all had slashed tyres when they come back that night. We knew what they were doing, and we got even with them. We got even with them. You were there. I was not there.
Here are 4 photos from the Hungry Miles that was done in 1953 by the Sydney Branch Film Unit. And they made, I think, about 11 documentaries. But this was the cornerstone of what had happened. It was called The Hungry Mile. And it depicted the working conditions prior to the 1940s. And one of the saddest things you'll ever see in the movie was the foreman would pick who he wanted. The big, the strong, and not the union people. And then he would then say, well, there's 10 more jobs. He'd throw the rest of the tabs up in the air and they would fight for them. Now that finished in 1942 because of the humane way in which it was done. And this film picked it up beautifully. And these were the old timers in that, he was, I forget his name now, I'll deal with that bloke in a minute. But the film unit has produced, it is, if you haven't got a copy, I think they were giving them out here some time ago for nothing, letting them put them on the table. I think we're going to get some more. And in fact, I'm going to a celebration on the 30th of April where Norma Disher was part of this. She's going to turn 100 years old. And it's out at the Ritz on that Saturday, and I'm going to go there to make sure that we pay tribute to the film unit and especially her. Wonderful, 100 years of age. And so, when you get a copy, please come and see me. I'll get you a copy of every film that was done by the Wharfies Film Unit. You know, the Wharfies in the 1950s was the Cultural Revolution. Long before the Chinese Revolution, Cultural Revolution, let me tell you. Because it had art classes, it had artists. We had the realist artists, which I spoke about before. It had the film unit. It had the art, you know, it was a hive of activity. We were the first to have a library. And then this magnificent mural, which I'm on the bite about very shortly, this magnificent mural was painted on the back wall of the Kittens. And just to let you know, I mentioned outside Georgie Williams I was in the gang with, and his father played for the Kangaroos and the Roosters. That's him there, Bocce Williams. So there's a bit more history to it, that wonderful Roosters. Okay, moving down.
Is there any other side of the comp?
Jamie, were you in charge of the film unit then?
Here we are. Billy? Who's doing? Billy? Here we are.
Comrades, I'm mindful of the time. The Federated Chip Painters and Dockers Union was born in Balmain. They were originally in the 1880s and 1890s, they were the Balmain Labourers Union. In early 1902, they were covering all chip painters and dockers in New South Wales. In 1909, they were the Federated Chip Painters and Dockers Union that took in people who performed that work around Australia. Just so you know, painters and dockers were then and are now still associated with chip building and chip maintenance and chip cleaning. That was their predominant work. They were 90% casual from 1909 to 1939. Only about 10% were permanent. And believe it or not, they created one of the first hiring halls, what we call the first hiring halls, in Balmain in the union office in 1939. It went from being 90% casual in circumstances like Jim spoke about on the Hungry Mile. The painters and dockers were the same. They established a hiring hall in the union office, running a roster, worked on the basis that the next one to the top of the roster was the last one to get a job. And that rotated. If you didn't take the job, you went to the bottom of the roster. You didn't get to pick and choose. They had a history of militancy. Another thing you'll be very surprised to know is that they were instrumental in the formation of the Trades Hall here in New South Wales and Sydney, and also the formation of the Australian Labor Party. So they had all of this wonderful history. They were affected significantly by mechanisation. Sandblasting and spray painting took a lot of the work away because they used to do a lot of chipping, a lot of brushing. Everything was done by hand. Interestingly, they had about 900 members in 1939. By the end of the war, because of the war effort, up to 1945, with the need to build more and more Australian seagoing vessels, that had got over 4,000 members. That's just painters and dockers, 4,000. Of course, by the time the 90s came, shipbuilding in Australia had fallen away dramatically. The numbers had fallen away. The legislation provided that if you had less than 1,000 members, you could not remain a registered trade union under the auspices of the legislation. And so in 1990, the Ship Painters and Dockers Union were deregistered. Their members, their remaining members, were split up between the MUA, who did chip repair and chip maintenance, and the Amalgamated Metal Workers Union, who did chip building, the remaining of the chip building. And we still represent painters and dockers. I know that everybody, I shouldn't say everybody, people would have heard about, there was some notoriety, and particularly notoriety arising out of the performance of the painters and dockers in Victoria. But just understand this was one of the most militant unions. If you needed support on any maritime dispute, the painters and dockers were the first ones there, giving a hand, stopping, making sure that there was no rubbish, I suspect some of our comrades, especially what Bobby and Len said, if the plaintiffs and dockers had been around in any force of numbers during the Patrick dispute, we would have really had a handful trying to keep things in control. But all that aside, they've been, along with the other unions, amalgamated. Bobby Elligan was the official, the last official from the painters and dockers up to the time of deregistration. He provided all of the union's assets to the MUA. He said, metal workers are great, support them. But he said, mate, everything we've got is coming to the MUA. We know you'll look after our remaining members. So that's just a brief history of the 120 years of the painters and dockers.
Like with every union official or union officials, there's always a scallywag around the joint. And we always have a funny story to tell. And the history with the Painters and Dockers Union and the great camaraderie with ourselves, it tells another story. There's two stories I can tell you about Bob. One about Bobby Elligan, first one. Bob was having a front to federal court and he looked like going to jail. And who do you reckon his witness was? E.V. Elliott. Now he hadn't met E.V. at all. Didn't know E.V. from a Paris hat. So Bob said, I get in the lift to go up to the commission, the federal court, in fact. He said, I got me little briefcase there, look important. He said, and Terry Gordon, who was the secretary at the time, the federal secretary, Terry said, suit up, you need to. So Bobby Gallagher gets to the lift and he's got this briefcase. Elliot gets in and he's standing there. And Elliot kept looking down at the briefcase and look at Bob. Did he stare ahead? Did he look at the briefcase again? Bobby said, I thought, what the bloody hell's he looking at? He said, all I've got in here is a Tribune and an apple. He said, so, in the finish, he said, I said to him, what are you looking at my briefcase for? He said, I'm just trying to work out how you could fit a Tommy gun in that briefcase. But when Bob died, it was a sad day when he died up the Central Coast. At his funeral, he talked about scallywags. A terrible thing happened. We all laughed because Bob would have laughed. When they were lowering him down, the strap broke. Boom, down he's gone. Crash to the bottom of the... So people were upset, of course. But there's a docky, jumps down in there, pulling it up. When he got out, he said, I've done me back in here. He said, you people are going to know about this.
This way, back here, back.
It's not a combo, right?
It would be remiss if we didn't mention the Dolphin dispute in Port Kembla, because it is historic. And I did a bit of reading up a couple of days ago, and in fact it was 1937 that the union itself declared no iron for the Japs. And so a year before, what happened in Port Kembla, where if you read the history, and it's an awful history of the Japanese invasion of Manchuria. It's a disgraceful, it is something so deplorable because they called it, in fact, the rape of Nanjing in that period of time. And so that slogan that came in 1937 was carried out in Port Kembla in 1938, where there was a ship there, the Dolphin, was loading pig iron to Japan. Now, to a man, the wharfies refused to load. To a man. And then, guess who turned up and said that you're not going to determine foreign policy for our nation? Bob Menzies. And as soon as he started to speak, I'm alleged to have heard that some woman yelled out, Pig Iron Bob! And that's where he got his name, Pig Iron Bob, from the Kembla woman who supported their husbands and their sons and whoever in that period of time. But when you work it out, how right they were. How right. They weren't 190 or 80 or 75, they were 100% right. Now in the end, They said, the reason being was that they said it will come back in bombs and bullets. Now this is 4 years before the bombing of Darwin, and they were right again. And so that they finished up loading after a lot of persuasion, and they threatened them with what they was called then the Licence Act. And that is, you had to apply for a licence to work, and if you didn't sign on the dotted line, you wouldn't get a job. And it was called the Dog Collar Act. The Dog Collar Act. And they defeated that. So in the process of not loading the rotten pig iron to Japan, they beat the awful licensing to work on the waterfront, and it turned out to be absolutely right. For in 1942, there was 21 wharfies killed in the ship in Darwin. 21 wharfies, and I think 33 injured, and another about 180 were killed in the city of Darwin. So, and I was part of the making of this documentary by Sandra Pyers, who comes from Port Kembla, and I raised, and so did Gary Keane, got to give Gary a mention, that we raised some $30,000 to $40,000 to have this documentary made, and it's available. I don't know how much, but we'll sell them to recoup the cost. But it was a wonderful, magnificent dispute that was proved again that we were 100% right. John, are you going to go first?
I'm going to just introduce John. Let's go. Comrades, I feel humbled and I feel a great pleasure introducing a man that's probably the longest serving member of this union. Came away in 1951. Johnny King. We talked about the Delgado paintings, about the conditions at sea. Today, our union's got us single berth cabins, decent wages, decent conditions, safe working conditions, but it wasn't all that way. John lived in an age when there was open forecastle full of TB. It was terrible before the union had won these great conditions that we've got today. And John was and John, I hope John tells you the story about how we respected not just around the world the Seamen's Union, but even in the community about our election. John was a returning officer for this union, and I'll let John go in the stories, and it's a pleasure to have always been your comrade, mate.
Thanks, John. Thank you. Just very briefly, I went to sea on the 14th of May 1951, and if anyone's up in the boxing game, that was the day Jimmy Carruthers fought Ellie Bennett for the Australian title, and that's when I joined the union in 1951. I've been involved with my parents were both school teachers, disciples of Sammy Lewis, which you probably would never heard of. He was a left-wing leader of the Teachers Federation in the 30s and 40s. But anyway, I've always been involved with the training union movement, and I went to sea and became involved with the union, did electioneering. On my 18th birthday, I think, we were delivering pamphlets. I was on a ship called the Bandolier in Port Pirie. We were unloading coal for the Trans-Siberian Railway because all the trains then were running on coal. And I ended up joining the Wanganella as an ordinary seaman and met Big Jim. In fact, I transported him around a couple of times when he was standing for the Senate in 1953, I think it was, 54, wasn't it, when Jim stood for the 54, I think. And I've always, so I've got in great involvement with the Seamen's Union. 50 years ago, I actually was working on a ship called, when the 100 years was on, and I surrendered my spots because this fellow desperately wanted to go to the 100-year centenary, so I did his gear turn. I was on the El Kutara, we're on paper pulp run, and that's So it's just 50 years later, and in that time I became official. I relieved in the office a couple of times. I relieved, and I became, when Paul Kingswood, which probably doesn't remember a lot of people, he was the returning officer and I became the returning officer prior to Elliott's demise. So I stayed with that for a long time, had a few problems, got taken, I think Taffy's not here, not Taffy, Paddy was there because we had a big problem. I ended up having to make a decision, and I ended up with Billy, what's his name, our official, I'll think of his name in a minute. Anyway, cut a long story short, had to make decisions, and it was going backed up by the union, and I did the last election before the amalgamation, and I did the first one after the amalgamation, which was an honour to do. So I just wanted to let people know that we're still going strong, very strong. We've still got we still run our own unions, own union elections, which is unique in the history of the trade union movement, where we run our own. We have to get permission off the government to do that. I'm out of it now, but so it's been a pleasure to come here tonight, and just briefly, very quickly, because I know you're all getting probably had enough of this. When the Vietnam War was on, I was working for Maritime Services Board, and we had a meeting, and had a stacked meeting because we stacked it, and we demanded, and because the Premier from South Korea, Marshal Kai, I think his name was something like that, they were using the Maritime Services VIP boat to give him a tour of the harbour. So we jacked it up, and anyway, they hired a private boat anyway. But the point was that when the bosses of Maritime Services found out that I was involved with it, they said, overtime for a privileged few and you're not one of them. So they starved me out of the joint and I went back to sea. So it's quite interesting, but I've had a very interesting time in this, and I'm still a life member of the Seamen's Union, and I joined in 1851, sorry. So
Okay. You'll be pleased to know there are two to go. There are two issues of our history we're going to deal with. And there's always that great story behind every great man is a woman. Well, I'm going to agree with that. Because here we have Ina Heitman and Della Elliott, which Joe will speak on. Ina came into the Sydney branch office in 1950, a 16-year-old, and within a year or two she became Tom Nelson's secretary. And those who know Ina, and I'm sorry to say I went to see her the other day and it wasn't good. It wasn't good at all. She's 88 years of age and she's in a nursing home. But I want her to be remembered because this woman was the artistic, not only artistic, but the get together, putting things together, gelling things, making sure that everything was on the plate before you needed it. She, along with Ralph Sawyer, who I've mentioned some time before, were responsible for the 16 history charts that are now posted up again in this magnificent area within the Sydney branch of the MUA, thanks to my old mate Paul. Because you have to, if you look at it, it goes from the inception of the union, which we started in Sydney in 1872, to 1993, when we amalgamated and then become the MUA. She was secretary to 6 of us. I was the last. Tom Nelson was the first, and I was the last. And I can tell you honestly, my job became a lot easier. In fact, during that she retired, but during the Patrick's dispute, she came back in to help on her own volition, which she knew we needed help. And she was there helping us organise, reorganise, and to make sure that everything was going according to the union, because I was down at Darling Harbour and Robert Coombs was out at Port Botany. And so she ran with Bernadette Whelan all that was needed in that office. And I can tell you, what two wonderful women, but this woman here, she is something special, and it was a bit hard for me to go the other day, very hard, because I was that close to her and her husband and her other friend Harry Black. And with the history of our union, of the Sydney branch, would not be there today without that woman. Thank you.
Now, when you tell the story of Della Elliot, what Jimmy's told you, I can turn around and say, well, Jimmy's told the story, the same story about Ina as we would about Della, because both of these two wonderful women were masters in their own right. A member of the union can come in to the office with Della, as with Ina, and say, I have a problem on the ship. I have a problem down at 5 Glebe. Della would say, or Ina would say, what's the problem? I need to talk to a union official. What's your problem? Because they knew their award back to front. They knew our award. They knew the structure. Della used to go down the ships and she would give it to you. If you were in the wrong and you put your neck out, she would give it to you like you wouldn't want to know. She got jailed. She got jailed for her efforts. Her and her husband, but Della in particular, there was a Greek seaman and his name was Tony Ambatiris.
Yes.
Now, Tony Ambatiris was a member of the Communist Party, he's a member of the Greek Seamen's Union, and the Greek junta at the time, the fascist junta, had Tony on death row. Tony was going to be shot to death. They said he's gone. Della Elliot went and confided in her comrade, Ina, and officials around the place, her husband, of course, Big Jim, and other people. That movement that started with this wonderful woman got Tony Ambatiris freed from jail. Not only did they say, we're not going to shoot him, we're going to let him go, because what they done and what she done, she went to every Greek ship. She said, he's a fellow countryman and he's going to get executed because he bucks the system of fascism in Greece. You can't let this happen. She single-handedly got Tony taken off death row and got him released. And she done that, and what I said out there before, you can't do these things unless you have the support and the solid base from the bottom up, from rank and files. If the rank and file don't support the system, Tony's dead. If seamen and wharfies don't get up out in the factories until metal workers, until woodworkers, Tony's dead. These wonderful people, Della, she used to ring me up, Christ almighty, what happened down there on that ship? When's he long retired? I say, I don't know. She said, get your ass in the gear and get down there and see what's going on now. These are wonderful people. Look, you only have to, this wonderful thing with the internet now, you only have to put up Della Elliot. It'll come up all in red. Because she was hated by the establishment, and Ina's the same. You can find out about these people, comrades. You can check it out yourself. You don't have to take Jimmy's word for it or my word for it or the union's word for it. This wonderful internet structure now, you just say, I'm going to Google Della Elliot. And I'll tell you her history. That's a wonderful history. 2 women. The union always had a structure, always from, I've been in the union 53 years now. No, 54 years, sorry. 54 years. And I'm a baby. I'm a baby in amongst that gang here today. I'm like a white Carter. as we say, once that came in the day. But we would have nothing except for some of the women in our union. And the union, both major unions and the other unions, always had that policy from when I was a kid. Women must have a say in the workplace. Aboriginal people must have a say in the workplace. Val Della and go strong, Ina Heitman. Thank you.
That's good. This is most probably a good way to finish. Internationalism. Now, both the Seamen and Wharfies were internationalists from the very start. Everything that we did was focused on internationalism. You have a look at the history, and a lot of it's here, where and when it started. Well, let me tell you, it started in 1886, when the British dockers went on strike for what they call the English tanner. They were on 4pence an hour. They wanted 6pence an hour, which was a tenner. A tanner, and in Australian language, it was a zack. Now, they had support of their own union, the Transport Workers and General Union. They had the support of the trade union movement in Britain. But the hungry ship owners and the stevedores were starving them to death. And let me tell you, they did. They set up soup kitchens to continue to feed not only the dockers over there, but the kids and the wives and the mothers. And it was the first international position that our union adopted in 1886, where not only here in Sydney, but we initiated it, went to Melbourne and other ports, and the general public got behind it. Now, I want to tell you, we raised £38,000. Now think of it, 1886. They were on their knees. They weren't going to win. There was no way there was no telegraph, you could get the money there, but the money got there within days of the near collapse of these beautiful people on strike. And let me tell you, it lifted them. They were able to buy things, they were able to feed their kids, feed themselves. Because in that period of time, under the what would you call it, the height of that type of capitalism, they'd just been through a depression. And there was another one 5 years down the track. And so we were able to send, in 1886, £38,000. And that's unheard of. And let me tell you, they didn't win. They went back to work, but within a short period of time, they got what they set out to get. And in fact, we were given in 1986 a plate that commemorates the 1886 Tanner strike. And on the back of it, they only printed 100 of them. And I proudly accepted that down at the old building, here in 65 on the first floor, from the union, the Transport Workers and General Union, plate number 86, designated that what we did and what the Australian people did and what the Australian trade union movement did to help these people in that period of time. So it was, in my opinion, the start of internationalism, of which we are so proud and got a bloody rich history. It goes back, I can't name them all, there's hundreds, you know, and we still do it today. We assisted Vietnam, we assisted Cuba. the Indian seamen, when they, the Indian seamen, India, they came here. You name it. Australia was known, especially with the seamen, the ITF ships that came in that weren't under an ITF flag. We're going to Australia to pick up cargo, or we're taking cargo to Australia. You know what they said? You beauty. Because when we get to Australia, we know that we're going to be able to call on the assistance of the seamen and the wharfies, and we're going to be able to get the ITF to bring in ITF conditions on those flags of convenient ships. And I kid you not, they wanted to come to Australia. And they still do, because of the work that we have done in the international movement. And I'm so proud to have been part of it. Joey's been part of it. Everyone in this room, there's quite a number, have been part of that wonderful, wonderful international history. And as again, it deserves to be put on tape this here today, because our history is so rich and diverse. It is identical to the Aboriginal people of this country. No difference. We have a wonderful history, they have a longer history. So I think it's been a wonderful time we've had here tonight. Do you want to finish up, Warren?
No,
Joey?
Joey's going to deal with the Palestine.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. There's one more to go. Okay, up to Joey. One to go.
I like the walking on the neck.
You got to stand here. Right there.
Stand there?
Yeah.
We're starting to feel like a bit of a hog here. Are we ready to go, Mr. Cameraman? Is ready, comrades? I'm ready. All right. Listen, this union, collectively, and, you know, when we were in our individual stages, always supported the struggle of the Palestinian people. From when I was a child, I went out and, I took to the streets with my mum and dad, championing the efforts of the Palestinian people and their courageous struggle against Zionism. Now, I'm not one to get up here and say I'm anti-Israeli, because I'm not. Because I'm not anti-people. But I am anti-Zionist. And I am anti what they are doing to the Palestinian people. Everyone, again, you need to read your history. You need to know about the struggle of these brave people, these brave Palestinian people. I'm proud to be associated with them. I'm proud to be associated with the struggle of the Palestinian people. I've got a photo at home. It's the most horrific photo you will ever see in your life. It makes me sick to look at it. It makes me angry to look at it, comrades. It shows an Israeli soldier, he's down on his haunches. And the mothers like that try to protect a little boy and a little girl, 7 and 8. And the soldier's like that, with his Armalite rifle, aiming at the little kid's head. And he's saying, get out of the way, because the little kids were throwing rocks at him. He wanted to kill him. He was going to kill him. Only the mother was pleading, don't. This is not right. This is not right. This is not what we're all about. We support peace, as we said earlier, and Tommy reiterated up there. Peace is union business. It's our business. Don't ever let someone tell you, because we oppose what the Zionists are doing to the Palestinian people on the West Bank and in Gaza. Don't ever let anyone tell you that is none of your business. But out of that, let them sort it their own way. How are we going to sort it? With little 9-year-olds throwing rocks at big tanks? Them killing people on a daily basis? In the name of what? In the name of what? Hegemonism, that's what it is. They're killing these little... This man, he was a leader of the PLO at the time when that photo was taken with Ryan McGibbon Thompson and myself up in Singapore. And he told us some of the most horrific stories about what's happening to Palestinian people. And he said, and the West, and he said, and sadly some people are ignoring us. He said, we put the pleas out. He said, we're sick of pleading with the United Nations. They just say, oh yeah, it's horrible. We'll get in there. We'll get in there and we'll call a motion in the chamber to condemn it. Then the United States, this country, the UK, and other countries turn around and squash it and veto it. This is what's happening in the world. This is what's happening. This is what the Palestinian people, to my way of thinking, are they the most greatest people. And this union politically, you know, we mentioned there before about how many communists are in the union. We haven't got that many now. We're down, you know, you fit them in a phone box actually, how many we've got. But the thing about it is with the communist movement, not everyone in this union is a communist, but everyone in this union should be well and truly awake to what's happening here. We should be condemning this on a daily basis. We should be saying to the National Secretary and the National Executive and all the branches, everyone else should be saying, do more about these atrocities against the Palestinian people. Now I'm going to start a chant, right? And I want you to follow me. Free, free Palestine, free, free Gaza. 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 That's coming from 150 years of unionism to you people in Palestine. We are with you. We'll always be with you. Speed to you, power to you, and condemnation to the Zionists in Israel. Thank you.
Well, comrades, all I want to say is this has been a very special occasion, and it has been brought about from the legends of our union, the legendary vets. So with that, comrades, I want 3 cheers for our comrades. Hip hip! Hooray! Hip hip! Hooray! Hip hip! Hooray!
Comrades, that's pretty much all we've got tonight. I'd like to also thank the wonderful contributions that we've heard, the beautiful history that's been told by these wonderful comrades that we owe so much. So take your time, have a look around. There's plenty of more displays that we haven't talked about. There's all the cases and there's plenty of stuff in the other rooms. Enjoy yourself, have a drink. There's probably a bit of tucker left. So that's the sort of close of the formalities, but I'd like to thank each and every one of you for turning up to what is a really special event and something very special for our union. 150 years of struggle, another 150 years of struggle to come. And thanks very much. MUA! Here to stay! MUA! Here to stay! MUA! Here to stay!